very, very interesting because, in a way, it's sort of surprising that nobody else has been doing this, because Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has been broadcasting on Zoom for months now,
yes,
direct to other people's parliaments. And this is the first time that anybody has had the idea of actually reciprocating.
Yeah.
So here we've got Boris Johnson speaking to the Ukrainian parliament, which, in terms of theatre, is a brilliant thing to do, not least because, as I said, he's the first one to think about doing it.
And look, a lot of the focus, I suppose, will be on Boris Johnson and all this, and a lot of praise will be given to him, rightly. But in many ways, it's not really about who it is; it's about what that means and what that means to the Ukrainian people. And he is announcing an important package today, isn't he?
Well, yes, and that seems to have rubbed the UK Parliament up the wrong way, because they're saying that that sort of package of new weapons for Ukraine should have been announced to the British Parliament before it's announced to the Ukrainian Parliament. And I think they have a point there. But, of course, the whole point of this is theatre. And it's interesting to me that throughout the last sort of 6 weeks of the Ukrainian conflict, what we've had is gradually a developing relationship, a personal relationship between Boris Johnson and Volodymyr Zelensky. And we saw Boris Johnson went to Kiev. We saw the pair of them walking around in the deserted streets of Kiev. And between them, you know, maybe because both of them have this sort of sense of drama and being at the centre of the action, and the way that Zelensky has sort of developed as a character and a war leader in recent weeks, that the two of them have developed this relationship, which hasn't really been, it's not been replicated with almost any other leader.
Joe Biden's looking on with lustful eyes on all of this, and he's talking about being on the ground in Kyiv as well, which would be a heck of an operation to put an American president there. So we don't know what's going to go on there, but there's no doubt about it that other leaders will be looking and saying, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah. Yes, this is true. I mean, other leaders have been to Kiev, and we saw that Boris Johnson's visit was practically immediately a day after the EU leaders had been to Kiev, and people have been that way. But the idea of broadcasting into the Kiev Parliament is, you know, it's just a very interesting thing to do, and it demonstrates, at least for the viewers, that Ukraine is functioning as a country, that its MPs are sitting in Parliament, and that whatever's happening on the periphery, whatever Russia is throwing at Ukraine, nonetheless, this is a functioning country. That's the message.
You use that word functioning. Can I ask you, because with your vast experience, I mean, you've been a correspondent for various publications around the world, and you were in, as I understand it, Russia, right, for the Times between 1988 and 92. Now, my first visit to Moscow was around that time, about 1990. And I was shocked by what I saw, because it was a third world country.
Yes.
We're talking now about sanctions and restrictions affecting trade in Russia, that it's going to bite. It's really going to bite, and people don't know what's coming. Could you sort of recount what it was like then? And I mean, that's pretty recent history. Are we likely to see that again? And if so, now that people have been used to the ways of the West and consumerism and whatever, and I have been back a number of times to Moscow before, and it's a completely different place. How are they likely to react to these sanctions?
Well, I think at the very beginning, quite a lot of us were actually more, I mean, pessimistic's not quite the right word to use here, but we thought that the immediate impact was going to be much more than it actually has been. And I think there are several reasons for that. One of them is that the Russian economy, particularly on food and consumer goods, has become less dependent on imports in recent years. And in a way, this is perversely because of the sanctions that Western countries imposed on Russia after 2014, after Russia occupied and annexed Crimea. there were a whole load of sanctions that the West imposed on Russia. And one of the effects of that was to make them much more self-sufficient, especially in food. And it led to a colossal rise in the agriculture sector. And so if you go into a Russian supermarket in pretty much any city, not just the main cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, if you go into mid-level cities, the actual level of consumer goods and supplies is really on a par with a lot of Western countries. And I think that at least for the time being, the sanctions aren't having the sort of effect of,
because we heard initially about queues at ATMs,
yes,
people not being able to use their phones to get onto the subway and things like that. Because
I think some of that has been adjusted to, because we were focusing on people who had contact with the West, who had foreign credit cards and bank accounts and things like that, and that's not the majority of Russians. The majority of Russians live in a Russian environment. And if they travel, they go to Turkey for a couple of weeks for their summer holiday. So going abroad is a problem, but it's not the same problem for the vast majority of Russians. And, I've seen recently that there's been somebody who has gone to Russia who spends time in St. Petersburg, tries to do that every year. And he's been round his local supermarkets, not having been there for 2 years because of the pandemic and now because of the war. And he's been back looking at it with the eye both of a native and of an outsider. And he's been quite surprised by the normality that's been preserved, at least so far.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.